6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
How about we do it again?
6, 7, 4, 3, 2, 1. I think I got it.
Okay, let's try one more
I
time.
definitely
Ready?
Making review. Making review. Making review.
Say 6,
6,
5.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello and welcome to episode 16 of Rank and Review. This week we're looking at Anthologies with our returning guest, J Adrian Cook. As usual, I'd like to warn my listeners that we will be talking spoilers and we will be talking with our typical foul language. So if that's a problem for you, proceed with caution. Thank you so much for listening to Rank and Review. So, we are going to do episode 16 of Rank and Review on Anthologies. My returning guest, J Adrian Cook, is with me in my filthy garage to discuss Anthologies.
Yeah, boy.
Did I force feed you Anthologies, or did you choose it? Now I'm trying to remember.
You recommended it to me, and this is not a force-feeding type of a situation. I was really looking forward to it.
We're licking our wounds after the terrible twos.
Indeed. Anthologies are basically short stories put on film.
Yes.
And the short horror story is one of my favorite genres out there.
It's sort of my gateway drug into horror fiction, because I'm a slow reader, or was a slow reader. I'm getting better in my old age, but yeah, that's why I like little ghost stories. I like little sort of 5 to 15 page, get in, get out. Either it does the job or it doesn't, but your investment was short enough that...
Me as well. The thing about short horror stories is that it's better for the genre, honestly, than longer form fiction, because in terms of horror, because you're not really sure if the hero or the protagonist is going to make it out of a short horror story. Whereas if you're reading longer fiction, you can be pretty sure the person you've been set up to identify with is going to make it through the next chapter.
Of course, there's no shortage of dour endings to horror movies, but I would say it's maybe 25-30% of your horror movies will end in a bad place, whereas with your short stories, it's more like 50-50.
I don't know. I think that would require a little bit more scientific
study than we have time. Yeah, we'll crunch some numbers.
Yeah.
I don't know. I like it as a genre, and I like for the films. I find it interesting when they try, how they try and wrap it around. If it's a theme, or if there's any kind of tether between these stories, other than they're trying to creep you out. In this selection, we have either they choose a format and run with it, or an author like Stephen King in a couple of places and run with that.
Well, even then, there's themes that tie all of the stories together.
Yeah. The weird thing about anthologies is, by the nature of their beast, is that it's not just one movie. It's, in this case, anywhere between 3 and 5 mini movies. So that's a lot of work for us as reviewers to try and cover everything. So what's your approach here? Are we going to do the highlight reel, or are we gonna give a thumbs up and thumbs down to each individual segment? How do you want to do this?
Well, let's play it by ear, but promise to ourselves we're going to keep it brief, no matter what we do. Unless there's a story that deserves special attention, whether it's extremely good or extremely bad, we'll just mention it was
It left its mark
and
on
leave
us.
it there.
Yes.
All right.
Okay, well, let's say what the 6 films that we're going to be talking about are. The first we're going to discuss, and probably the most tenuous as far as it being an anthology film, is The Signal. It does kind of feel like one film, but it's broken into 3 different transmissions, done by 3 different directors.
It counts, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, it's a legit, yeah. So The Signal, we're going to look at Twilight Zone, the movie. This is sort of some A-list directors coming to the board. Your Joe Dantes, your Steven Spielbergos. The recent horror hit VHS, which is found footage approaching the anthology. Sort of the cult-respected Halloween-themed movie Trick or Treat. And then 2 Stephen King themed movies. We have George Romero's Creepshow, and we have Cat's Eye. From the 80s, directed by Lewis Teague, who also directed Cujo, another Stephen King movie, which I actually quite like.
Let's do it. I'm excited.
Let's do it. That's it. That's all. You have nothing further to say in this introduction.
Oddly enough, no.
No, okay. Here we go.
Go to the country and start a life.
Leave?
Go down to the station. We'll get on a train and we'll get in our own private compartment. New Year's Eve, Terminal 13, Maya and Ben.
That's beautiful.
That was strange. The TV turned itself on.
What's going on? Why isn't anything working? Everybody's out in the hallway.
That's the same sound that was coming through the phone.
What's the matter with you?
Okay, so the first movie we're going to talk about is The Signal. Yeah, it's... I don't know if we're set in the future here, but this is a fictional environment sort of world in the city of Terminus. The name is Terminus, and it feels like a first draft choice to be called Terminus. Maybe in the first draft of the script they wrote Terminus and thought they would come up with a better one later on, and they never got around to it.
I was going to ask what you thought was the meaning of Terminus, because honestly I'm drawing a blank here.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know, weirdly almost too appropriate considering the apocalyptic scenario that is playing out. It's a little bit on the nose, and the movie is not that. In fact, I found the movie kind of hard to predict where it was going to go next.
Yes.
So, yeah, that one little detail is almost off-putting to me, but I put it aside, and I'm glad I did, because overall I really did like The Signal.
The story is basically a strange signal starts getting broadcast over all televisions and radio. Any signal that comes through, basically, is interrupted by this other strange signal which makes weird noises and weird colors. And people who see it turn sociopathic and schizophrenic.
Yeah. It's hard. It seems everybody is affected a little bit differently. I don't know if it's about how much you watch it or how much you're exposed to it or just how close to the edge you were to begin with. But we see several different people and how they react to this sort of apocalypse of madness.
Yes. So a boy and a girl. The girl is married. Her name is Maya. She is married to a man named Louis, and her lover is Ben. They decide they're going to leave town forever and leave Louis behind. But before they can do that, the signal takes over the whole city, and things start going very, very wrong as they're attacked by random hordes of indestructible people who are crazy and want to murder each other.
Yeah. And this sounds sort of like typical zombie type of environment, but it's not that exactly. Not necessarily everyone you encounter is out to kill you, but everyone you encounter is mentally ill. So, yeah. It is an interesting environment, and like I think that they were hoping to franchise this when this was made, so we can see many stories that went on in Terminus in this apocalypse. I doubt that we're going to see a sequel to this, but it's an interesting enough conceit, and there would be a lot of stories to tell.
So, Transmission 1. Mm-hmm. This is the story of Maya as she attempts to get to the train station to meet up with Ben. And as she goes to her car and tries to go back to her apartment where her husband is staying, she starts seeing creepy characters approaching her in the parking lot. and weird things happening in the hallway of her apartment building, and yelling and people wandering around. And then we meet Lewis, who is her husband, who seems to have been a little bit creepy and dangerous before he was exposed to the signal. Would you not agree?
No, yeah. I think he already started at about an 8 out of 10 as far as, being hyper amped and slightly crazy. But this broadcast, this signal, put him over the top. Actually, the actor playing Lewis is one of the few actors I recognized from the film. Is A.J. Bowen. He does a lot of horror movies. Mm-hmm. He was in Hatchet 2, and he was in the House of the Devil. And he seems to like the genre, so as a result, I like him.
He was very good in this role, too.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what I liked about him, even though he was a very hateful character and you really wanted to see him fall, in his head, at every turn, he was doing what was right.
Indeed.
And that sort of made him not sympathetic, but it made him a more interesting villain.
Yes. But of course it's the second story that really stars him.
Yes.
Maya is the main star of this, and the name of the fellow that she actually interacts with is Rod, who makes a creepy-looking mace in order to defend himself
Correct.
from the weirdos who are attacking him. And as the story progresses and he tries to protect Maya, we discover that he, quote, has the crazy as well, end quote, and is actually quite violent and dangerous to be around himself. And that's basically where the story ends off, is Maya fleeing from him. So, yeah, decent first story. It establishes the rules of the signal.
Yeah, we know that people are going crazy, and we know that everyone reacts slightly differently.
Yes, the strangers in this one I thought were particularly creepy. Mm-hmm. In the parking garage, when the guy just rushing over to talk to her.
With this weird youthful enthusiasm, almost. Yes.
So, Transmission 2.
Yeah, that's when we get a little sillier with it. We get a little stranger with it.
It's the funny one.
Yes, indeed. And it's not like it's accidentally funny. It's very deliberate. In the performance, in the lines, and in the execution, all of a sudden we're allowed to breathe a lot more, and we're allowed to laugh.
Yes.
At the sort of ludicrous ridiculousness of the situation.
So Lewis has gone looking for Maya and has come in contact with a new kind of protagonist by the name of Clark. And Clark is not as of yet exposed to the signal. And this story is, like you say, quite funny, mostly because Clark is the straight man, and everybody that he's interacting with is mentally ill at this point. Particularly Lewis, who tries unsuccessfully to navigate the world around him, but usually just ends up murdering somebody.
Yes, he gets frustrated, and then that anger expresses itself through violence very quickly. Mm-hmm. Another interesting thing, these characters were to be hosting a New Year's Eve party, I believe. And they keep on, they're expecting guests. They keep on trying to keep social normalcy going on in spite of the mad situation that they're sitting in. And it is funny. It's genuinely, amusing to watch. But I did find that the abrupt shift kind of, it didn't take me out of the movie exactly, but it made me kind of miss the creepy movie that I had been watching.
Well, that's one of the things I liked about it, honestly, is that it did introduce this, I'm not going to say lighthearted, but we'll say funny aspect to it. And then as this story continues and Lewis gets more and more unhinged, you start feeling, or at least I did, I started feeling shame that I had been laughing earlier, and this horrible twisting feeling in my stomach, like, this is not funny anymore.
Yeah.
And it does that really, really well.
Well, and the main thing, one of his main weapons in this is the extermination pump. I don't know what you call those things that are used to spray cockroaches or whatever.
Pest control whatchajiggies.
Yeah, I don't know, but he's pumping this foul poison into these poor people's faces and mouths, and it's really actually gets increasingly horrifying as it's going on, and you're seeing the effect it's having, and he's not particularly enjoying what he's doing either, but he is not stopping it.
Yes.
So yeah, the escalating madness of it I really did like, but I think they might have hit the humor a little harder than I would have, but what was in my movie.
So Transmission 3 follows Ben in his journey trying to get to the train station to meet up with Maya.
Everybody's looking for Maya in this movie, basically. Or Maya's looking for somebody, then her husband's looking for her, and then her boyfriend's looking for her.
Yes. And lucky for Ben, he was very badly exposed to the signal, but he is able to see through it and think a little bit more clearly than everybody else. And
I wasn't sure if this was the power of love or if it was the repeated heavy blows to the head that he was sustaining that was keeping him clear.
Well, it seems as though being exposed to the signal makes you a little bit more impervious to damage, regardless of what it does to your mind, because there is one blow which he takes from Lewis right near the edge of the van, which
looked like it would kill someone.
It would be fatal.
Yeah,
definitely. There's a big blood splatter on the window of the van, and you think to yourself, "Okay, end of story."
Yeah, his
but
head
it's
has
not.
just been opened. Nope.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's interesting because we get flashes of, I guess, their madness, what we see in their heads. At one point, Ben has Lewis basically helpless on the floor, and we see him basically smashing his head in with this metal contraption, and we snap out of that and we realize that that didn't actually happen. He was just sort of living that experience in his own mind. In the long run, it might have been better for everyone had he actually done that, but again, it sort of keeps you not sure where you are in the movie.
And let's not forget as well the very memorable scene where Clark reanimates Rod's head so that he can talk to it, but then realizes after Rod has delivered his message that it didn't actually happen.
No, none of that took place. Yes.
So the problem with this one, I think this was actually probably the weakest of the three, and mainly because I didn't understand what happened at the end. So it seemed as though Ben confused Lewis to death.
Yeah.
And I'm not really sure how he did that.
He convinced Lewis that Lewis was Ben. That in fact the husband was not the wronged husband, the cuckolded husband. He was actually the guy who was trying to steal the wife, right?
Yeah.
And I guess he was already so fragile and so badly beaten that it caused enough confusion that. And I think seeing all the fear in Maya's eyes, too, did a lot of that. I never really managed to feel sorry for Lewis. I just didn't.
No, not very sympathetic character. But, yeah, once the Lewis is gone from the picture, I thought it had a pretty satisfying ending.
Yeah.
So, this brings us to the whole idea behind the signal, and the reason that I really like it is that it is actually quite an intellectual movie. At one point when Ben describes how he managed to get past what the signal was doing to him, he said that there is a static that was covering up something very natural and very real inside, and the signal is a lie, and it tries to make you do things, and the things that it makes you do are violent and selfish, and in Lewis's case, it was kind of the American dream. He wanted to get Maya back so that he could live in a home with her and raise a family, and nothing was going to stop him from getting that.
Yeah.
And these are the same criticisms that can be leveled at modern media. The signal is, it just makes funny noises and weird sounds, but it does all the same things that people say that modern media do.
Right. And is it driving us crazy? Is it actually causing more madness and violence in the world than it is preventing? Yeah. Yeah. Again, I guess I didn't think as deeply about it as you did when I was watching the movie, but I think that is definitely there. And the few people who aren't immediately affected is because Maya's listening to a mix CD given to her by her lover. So she's tuned out the media, so she's temporarily, left out of the craziness.
Yes, and it's that mix that brings her back to sense. the real feeling inside of what Ben felt for her comes through the music.
I did get a little bit of, the fifth element is love feeling out of that, but the movie earns it. So
yeah. So my final feelings were, this is a great movie, can be enjoyed on many levels. You can watch it for the splatterfest, because there sure is a lot of gore and blood, and in particular, I think Rod trying to swing a hatchet while all of his limbs are broken, that's going to stand out in my memory. But then it's also got this wonderful message behind it that you can ponder after you've seen the movie. And as a final coup d'etat, I actually, for some reason, after I saw this movie, before I went to bed, I locked all the doors in the house.
Wow.
Yep.
That is high praise.
Yeah, it unnerved me.
On June 24th, 4 acclaimed directors, George Miller, John Landis, Joe Dante, and Steven Spielberg, take you to another dimension.
Twilight Zone, the motion picture. John Landis directed the wraparound story and the first segment, so I would start there. It's hard doing a plot breakdown on these, but basically we open on a couple of guys played by Albert Brooks and Dan Aykroyd driving through the night and killing time and basically keeping each other company. And I really like it, sort of a nice sort of light opening to the proceedings. It's funny, it's charming, and it sort of feels like we're meeting, two victims. Something bad is going to happen to these guys, right? We know we're watching Twilight Zone, the movie. And in typical Twilight Zone fashion, there's a twist.
Indeed.
And it sets the tone for at least, if not the movie, what a typically or a good Twilight Zone story does for me is it sets up a series of events where you think you know where it's going, and then it just sort of surprises you just a little bit at the end. It has that little twist.
And also sets up the Twilight Zone movie as a tribute to the Elder show as well, when they talk about some of their favorite older episodes.
We've talked about this in the past episodes too. I think it was Chris Hardwick said that Twilight Zones can sort of be whittled down to nice try, asshole. There's usually some weird twist or a moral breakdown that happens at the end of the episode that's like, oh, it could have been good for you, but no, sorry. Nice try, asshole. Yeah.
That's very clever.
All he wants to do is read, and the world has been blown up. And he's in a library with thousands and thousands of books, but he breaks his glasses. Nice try, asshole.
You know what? I'm actually remembering an old Twilight Zone now. The one where the guy figures out he can stop time, and then there's a nuclear attack, and he stops time, and he can't enjoy his gift anymore, because if he gets time going again, the world will be destroyed. Nice try, asshole.
Exactly. Not all of the stories in this movie fall under that category, but I do think that the best Twilight Zones do. And now that you have that in your head, you'll always have that in your head anytime those twists happen. Nice try, asshole.
So the first one, Time Out.
Starring Vic Morrow, who gave his life for this motion picture and this segment in it.
He and 2 Vietnamese kids. If you haven't heard about this, here's what happened. They were shooting a scene supposed to be taking place in a Vietnamese village, and Vic Morrow, his character, whose character name I can't remember. Anyway, he's saving these 2 kids when an American helicopter hovers over them and starts shooting at them. Well, in real life, the pyrotechnics de-enameled the rear rotor on the helicopter, which made it spin out of control, and killed Vic Morrow and the 2 kids. In fact, decapitated him.
Yeah. Ugly stuff. And Landis was out of the business for a little while as a result of it. And, nobody's happy when something like that goes on set. And lended some pretty ugly notoriety to the film before it hit theaters.
Indeed. And unfortunately, it also kind of ruins the story.
Yeah. There's a part of it's missing, and you can sort of tell, I think, when you watch it.
You're just kind of confused by what's going on. I mean, you were getting the idea that he was learning his lesson about racism.
Yeah.
But
basically, the story is a racist, bigot, sexist jerk-off who's at a bar having a few drinks after work and blaming all of his problems on, what he thinks of as the dregs of society, is basically gets unstuck in time, Pilgrim style, and all of the places he encounter are harsh lessons on where intolerance and racism can lead.
Yes, he's cast as the victim of racism and intolerance in each of the places he goes. Nazi Germany and Vietnam and where else?
Wasn't there a lynching?
Oh yes, that's right.
Yeah.
There's a lynching.
Good times.
Yeah.
I don't know where they were in the filming or if the story was meant to end where it is. I assume it must have, since that film was shot. But the last thing we see of this guy is him stuck on the back of a train that's headed off to take him and a bunch of other Jews to the ovens. Mm-hmm. And, he learned his lessons that racism is wrong. He learned his lesson that being a bigot and a racist is wrong, but it was too late. Nice try, asshole.
Nice try, asshole. Well, the problem with this one is that we really, okay, great lesson, guys. Racism is bad, okay? Come on. We saw where this was going after the first scene. We didn't need to see more of it.
I didn't get that Scrooge at Christmas morning moment from him either, where he he had that turn where he realized that he was wrong and that he was scared because he was the one being victimized. But I didn't feel like he was learning anything other than how to be scared shitless.
Yeah, well, maybe that scene was in there and then it didn't get filmed.
Yeah, there's just a lot of unanswered questions here, but I actually like the introduction to the movie more than I like the first segment.
Yes. And speaking of disappointing segments, let's move on to segment number 2, Kick the Can.
Yes, this is written by Richard Matheson, who I like, and Spielberg, who I try to like. And this movie does not belong in the Twilight Zone one. It reminds me of the TV show when they had one of those family-friendly moral lesson tales. I'm like, no, I watch Twilight Zone to be scared. And what's this story doing here?
I would imagine maybe there were things like this in the original Twilight Zone series. Maybe they weren't all scary, but like I say, I haven't seen it.
They all have a sense of wonder or a supernatural angle to them, but they're not necessarily horrifying every time.
Well, I would have been able to tolerate the story of this if it had been executed better.
Yeah.
It was just atrocious.
Saccharine.
Yes, the dialogue is repetitive and on the nose. The worst dialogue I've heard in a long time. It's delivered over the top and hammy by the old people, and then once they become children, they lose that and become wooden instead.
Wooden but adorable.
And that one kid doing that awful English accent was...
Yes, a bunch of elderly people living in a care home meet a
magical Scatman Carruthers.
Yes.
Because he only plays that one character in everything that he's in.
And he invites them to play a game of Kick the Can, and they get to learn what it's like to be kids again by becoming kids. And it's sweet, and it eats up a good 20 minutes of this movie, and I resent every minute of it. It's like, couldn't we be watching, 1941 or The Lost World or one of the other really shitty Spielberg movies? And considering the crop of stories that they selected for this movie, this is clearly the odd one out. I don't know where they thought it fit. This sort of reeks of no one says no to Spielberg. This is the story he needed to tell, even if it wasn't necessarily right for what the movie was presenting us.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if this was bad directing or if Spielberg was doing a tribute to old lighting effects, but it was really overused, that mirror effect where they shine the light in an actor's eyes when he's saying something really sincere. Overused Spielberg.
And the heavy-handed musical cues and like, short of actually having the subtitle on screen saying, cry now, cry now, cry now. Again, this wasn't a story that I wanted, and it wasn't a particularly well executed one,
Yeah.
It seemed like someone's, trying to emulate Spielberg more than it felt like Spielberg in a lot of ways.
Indeed. Shame, Steven Spielberg. Let's move on.
Moving on. Let's not dwell on this issue. Things get a little bit more interesting in the next chapter, which is directed by Joe Dante.
This one is called It's a Good Life.
Yeah, and they did borrow it from an original episode, I believe. I don't have a very clear memory of it, but the concept of a little kid that has the power to bring to life anything he imagines is a familiar story to me. If it's not from the Twilight Zone, I definitely bumped into it somewhere.
A woman.
Yes, I'm trying to remember the name of the actress who plays her. Kathleen Quinlan.
Kathleen Quinlan drives into a little town one day and meets a little boy named Anthony, who she believes is being abused by the townspeople.
Yes, it's his birthday and no one seems to care.
Yes, but as she gets more acquainted with Anthony and his little freak show running, she discovers that he's actually a horrible tyrant and trapping people in his clutches to live this obscene family life. And I think this is a very good story.
Yeah.
Very good concept, anyway.
And it's played very cartoonishly, and that you can attribute to Joe Dante, who just loves the Warner Brother cartoons. We actually see a Tasmanian devil live and in person at one point, and it's quite horrifying.
That was really cool, I thought. Yeah. With the cartoonish dialogue, I found that it was actually a little bit disconcerting at first, because we had just gone through a segment where everyone was hamming it up, and then everyone was doing it again, and you're like, oh God.
This was our payoff for waiting through Kick the Can, though, right?
Yeah, but then we realize as the story goes on that these people are actually hamming up their dialogue on purpose.
To please
Anthony,
the kid.
everything's fine.
Yeah.
You know?
The horror behind their smiles is what really makes it work. McCarthy, is it Anthony McCarthy? I can't remember. He was in the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers. He sort of plays the uncle character in this, and I particularly enjoyed his performance. You could see he was smiling big, but his eyes were not smiling with it at all. And you kept on asking questions like, how long have these people been there? Yeah. And where is his original family? Or did he ever have one? Is he actually a little boy at the end of all of this, Every corner you look in this story is creepy, and I like that about it a lot. Mm-hmm. The imagination in it is great. And, the way that this little boy's imagination expresses itself is, exactly what a little boy would probably imagine, and yet horrifying.
Yes, and it has too the creepiness of kids. Mm-hmm. Kids can be that much less empathetic than teenagers and adults, and Anthony murders people. Yeah, and doesn't feel that bad about it.
No, I remember being quite scared. I saw this at a young age. The one girl that we only see from behind for a really long time that was his sister.
Yes.
But she had the nerve to lose her temper with him and say some cruel things, so he removed her mouth.
Yes. Then the cure for Anthony is a little bit of discipline, as we find out near the end, without going too much into that. Great story. Yeah. Liked it.
Yeah, he realizes he needs more than yes men in his life. He needs an actual parental figure. Is he able to allow her to rule him? We don't know.
But we will never find that. Presumably some more horrifying things are going to happen, but it's the beginning of a new story, which we get to imagine for ourselves.
Yeah, but it was a nice way to wash out the bitter taste of the previous segment.
Indeed.
And it leads us to the grand finale.
Segment 4, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. Mm-hmm. John Lithgow. John Lithgow. He plays a man who's afraid of flying, who gets on a airplane flight, and as he's looking out the window, believes he sees a gremlin destroying the plane outside.
Yes.
And proceeds to freak out and has to find a way to stop the gremlin, but also not freak out the stewardesses on the flight who try to sedate him and hold him down.
He's already very anxious and nervous just to be on the plane, just to be flying. He's like already a high-strung fellow. And to add this on top of it, of course nobody believes him. John Lithgow. Now, I do like the man. I think that he's a very talented actor, but I think he is one of these people that is always at 11. You know, very rarely do you get a subtle performance from John Lithgow. I think this is masterful casting. This is using him to his best effect, because you completely buy why the people sitting around him would think this guy is fucking crazy. Like, there's just nothing good's gonna come from sitting next to this guy. Can I switch seats with anyone else, please? But you also believe that he's not crazy and that his panic is legitimate. And it takes rather extreme circumstances for us to, you know.
Well, I don't know about that. I think it's rather ambiguous as to whether or not he's imagining the gremlin, particularly because of the way that the director juxtaposes the gremlin looking in and grimacing, and then in the next scene you'll see John Lithgow looking out of the window with that another horrible grimace on his face. You start wondering, is this thing really...
Did he just catch his own reflection for a second there? Well, again, I took it very literally. Again, I saw it at a young age. There was a gremlin there. And I think the movie wants us to know that there's a gremlin there at the end. But
definitely, yes.
This is the other one that was done by Richard Matheson. And I actually think that the screenplay for this episode of The Twilight Zone and the infamous episode of the original Star Trek where Kirk gets split into Evil Kirk in the teleporter, which was also written by Matheson, more so than a lot of his books, sort of established him as like a king of sci-fi and horror writing, because they're great stories. Yeah, the idea of taking a already anxious scenario, which is flying, and I sort of believe everybody's a little bit scared of flying. There are people who are a lot scared of flying and that it really affects them, but I think everybody knows when you're in one of those metal contraptions flying at 20,000 feet.
In a lot of turbulence and a storm, I might add.
Yeah. You just you shouldn't be here. What are we doing up here? This is madness, you know? And you don't believe that even though your seat is a flotation device, that's going to help you when you come crashing down to Earth, you know? So, yeah, everybody has that fear, and it's well exploited here. So. Yeah,
great performance by John Lithgow, just over the top enough to be convincing. So... that's about it for the Twilight Zone. Takes us
to the end of the Twilight Zone, the movie. We do get a little sort of button ending to it, which brings us back to the beginning. But, so it starts slow. The first two stories, the second two stories, yay. So in the end, it's a fairly mixed review for me, which is fairly typical, I find, for anthology films. Different writers, different directors means sort of different flavors throughout the film.
Okay, here's the deal. We gotta break into this house, and all we have to do is steal this one VHS tape. Found it! You got it? Yeah. Which one is it? I don't know, man. Let's just look at these tapes, okay? What's so special about this tape, anyway?
So we're going to talk about VHS. This is a really interesting format, I find, that they've got here. All of the films in this found footage anthology film are supposedly VHS tapes. So someone's recorded and collected these weird things. Even though one of them is a conversation over Skype that we're seeing, it's someone's personal collection of bizarre videotapes. It sort of starts with this crew of ridiculous criminals that is sort of like the dark side of Jackass. If you can imagine, like the crew from Jackass, only they were legit criminals who did horrible acts, but were still just stupid enough to film themselves doing it. They get tasked to go to a spooky house and acquire a VHS tape. And when they get there, they find a room full of VHS tapes. They find a dead body, and they're not sure which tape they're to get, so they start rolling footage. And the stories that we are then subjected to make up the stories in the anthology.
Yes.
I thought the premise was solid enough, and I thought that they justified the low budget with the format, and that with some exceptions, for the most part, they did well with it. J Adrian Cook, what did you think of VHS?
Well, let's go by a story-by-story basis here. We'll start with the overplot, which is entitled Tape 56. This was unfortunately a very weak story, which tied all the rest together. And unusually, it ends right before the second or the last story begins.
Yeah, usually you get all the stories and then they wrap up the wraparound, but they opted not to go that route, which was interesting anyway. But
the basic story is there's a bunch of assholes and they die.
Yeah.
So there's not much to talk about there. We see them doing stupid shit and then they're dead. Moving on. Amateur night.
Yeah, okay. Well, for me, personally, the first story, once we get into the stories, was clearly the strongest story of the bunch.
Agreed. It starts off a little rocky because we are introduced to another group of assholes who go woo all the time.
Yeah, and we just sort of gotten away from one group of assholes to be embraced into another, which was kind of unfortunate.
But that's okay because the story which happens after this is so horrifying.
Yes.
That you will forget your misgivings. We have 3 guys who decide to go and do a reality porno movie by a pair of glasses that have a secret camera.
Spy camera of some kind in it.
Embedded in them. And the idea is that they're going to find some woman who wants to get fucked and then do her possibly with 2 or 3 of them. And
have
then
the
what?
memento of it, have
Yes.
it all recorded.
And they find a woman. And her name is Lily.
Before anything goes wrong, almost the second that you see her, there's something wrong with this chick. Like, you're just like, you are made uncomfortable by her presence right away. At least I was.
Indeed. And then each time, she has basically only one line of dialogue. Each time she says it, it gets more and more chilling.
Yes.
I like you.
Yes.
I like you. And as the evening rolls on, she begins to exhibit more and more inhuman signs, and then, well, it doesn't turn out very well for our heroes.
Yeah, all of the things that make really good found footage movies work well are exemplified, I think, in this first story, because the shaky camera, as he's wearing the glasses on his face, is richly justified. And the fact that he's not cutting the footage, you always have that question, why don't they just stop the recording? Well, I'm sure about halfway through his experience, he has totally fucking forgotten that he's recording all of this in his glasses, right? The graphic violence and the fairly graphic nudity that we're subjected to in this segment, right out of the gate, is also jarring because of the reality with which it is handled. It just makes you feel like you're watching a snuff film more than you're almost comfortable with. And I remember watching that going like, Jesus, this is the first story.
Yeah.
Bravo on that first segment. Absolutely.
Indeed. The next is called Second Honeymoon. It follows a young couple as they travel together, and they're stalked by a mysterious stranger.
Yeah. Very weak, I found.
Yeah. It has a sense of dread in it during the night segments when we see the stranger taking the camera and doing things to the couple, but it kind of ends senselessly. I suppose it's supposed to have a twist, but whatever. I think we can move on.
I just want to say that particular segment was probably directed by the biggest name of the bunch, Ty West, who's sort of coming up in the horror genre. And I'm a defender of Ty West. So surprised and disappointed me that was one of my least favorite segments in the movie.
Yes. The third segment is called Tuesday the 17th, which is, I think, unfortunately, is another throwaway.
Yeah.
A group of assholes goes out in the countryside and they are killed.
Yeah.
The end. Didn't really like any of them, didn't care that they died, and we can just forget about them.
There's a reputation that this film has as being misogynistic, and I can understand how someone would watch this movie and think that. The theme of, men being complete pigs and assholes is well explored in many of the stories, but the stories were all produced and directed and written independently and then assembled into this film. So that weird undercurrent of sadism and sexism was creepily not delivered. It just sort of happened. I don't think I hated that episode as much as you did. I thought it was kind of a cheat that that they used blurry footage so that we never really saw who was dealing this death. But kind of glitchy monster. Yeah, I appreciated that one had the momentum that the previous story hadn't. I think the thing with the Ty West style is he likes to slowly get into your nerves and creep you out, and that works long form, but not so much short form. This was basically, like a Friday the 13th condensed to 10 minutes. Only you never saw Jason, Yeah.
At least in Friday the 13th, you got to know some of the characters.
Right.
And that's the main problem with this one. Just didn't give a shit.
Yeah.
So, then the fourth story is called The Sick Thing That Happened to Emily When She Was Younger. I would say it's sick. Would you describe it as that?
Yeah. I don't know if I completely understand the title.
Well, basically the story is, it's a Skype conversation between Emily and her boyfriend. And Emily is clearly a little bit unstable. She thinks that she's seeing ghosts in the house.
Yes. And
the ghost sightings get more and more freaky as the movie goes on, and her boyfriend tries to talk her down.
Yeah.
And there's elements of self-surgery in here, and there's elements of not-so-self-surgery near the end. It all culminates in something rather disgusting and creepy. Unfortunately, I had no idea what the hell it was at the end.
Right.
I had to look up online what actually happened. Did you?
I didn't look it up necessarily. I guess I didn't find it clearly. I think the way I interpret it is that she was put deliberately into this scenario by her boyfriend, and that he had more than one fish on the line. This was just one of many girls that he was Skyping and doing this terrible shit.
Well, yes, but you know what the ghosts were? They were aliens. Did you know that?
I did not.
They were aliens, and the creature that was pulled out of her stomach at the end of the show by the boyfriend, who is actually hiding in the next room, was an alien-human hybrid. And all the dialogue is there if you follow it, but it's presented in such a confusing manner that you can't really tell what's going on. No. So
it's interesting, because I didn't get all of that out of it. What I still got out of it was really good thrills and chills, because there's an interesting thing about this character, that main female character, is that she's, on one hand, seems quite fragile, but on the other hand is remarkably brave.
That's right.
Like, way braver than I would be in such a scenario. She feels completely safe for some reason when she's talking to this guy over Skype, even though he's not there. So she lifts up her computer and is walking from room to room, and she's just saying, tell me if there's something there, tell me if there's something there. Which is just not how I would handle such a situation at all. Mm-hmm. And then to find out that this person that was her rock, who she was depending on, was actually the person that was fucking with her. That's sort of where the horror of it came from. But
yes.
I didn't understand all of the specifics of it at all.
Now you know.
And now I guess I do. But again, the strange thing that happened to Emily when she was younger. Why when she was younger?
Oh, who knows? It might be just some idea that somebody came up with, or maybe they knew somebody, and these people, whoever they were, thought
Yeah.
this is what happened to them when they were younger. I don't know.
But this story, although it again could be argued as, a little bit exploitive and again a little bit sadistic and masochistic, sort of brought me back to that first story as far as, wow, that was a really good, unnerving story. Like, I guess even with me failing to completely comprehend all of the ins and outs of it, it still worked my nerves enough that I liked it.
Same here. So our last story is 10/13/98.
Yes.
Which I believe is the only one that actually looks like it was filmed on videotape. The rest of them look like they were filmed on digital.
Right.
And this is a story of a group of assholes.
Who were looking for a Halloween party.
Yes, and they go to the wrong house.
Oh, did they?
Yes. They, instead of going to the haunted horror house fun house thought they were in, it actually turns out to be an actual legitimate place with hands coming out of the walls and
some sort of ritual going on
sort
in
of
the
a cult.
attic.
Yes. And there's some pretty great special effects in this, and what I like about it as well is that they actually make us care about the assholes a little bit.
They do almost everything right. Once they finally realize they're in jeopardy, everything they do is pretty much understandable and reasonable to the scenario. I mean, maybe I wouldn't have the balls to go back and try and rescue the woman that they saw in there, but I don't think that they behaved stupidly or horror movie stupid like you so often see. They tried to get the person out of there. Everything that they did to try to escape made sense.
And that was something nice that they did. Like, that's something that I don't think had previously happened in the movie. No one was nice to anyone else.
Yeah, but that's the horror genre. No good deed goes unpunished.
Yeah, satisfying ending as well.
Yeah, and that one had pep and energy and was snappy, and it wasn't my favorite of them, but I enjoyed it.
So overall, I thought this was a pretty good entry. It had some high points and some low points, but the high points overshadowed the low ones quite a bit. Plus the fact that it was obviously low budget made me really want to root for the movie.
Absolutely. And I remember talking to you on the phone, and I was checking in to see where you were with the movies, and I was like, let's see if he's seen VHS yet. So I just said, so does this mean anything to you, Jeremy? I like you. I like you. You shuddered on the other end of the line. I think that the flaw of the movie is that it probably has one or two stories more than it should. I think you could probably cut the Ty West story, and you could probably cut maybe the Friday the 13th one, or the 17th.
Yeah.
The kids. If both of those stories were gone in the entirety, the movie would still probably be 95 minutes long. And, it would be stronger for it. I think that because of the shaky cam and because of the, real shortage of likable characters, at almost 2 hours, the movie will probably wear a lot of people out. It's almost one of those things that it's good to watch in installments. They're like a bunch of short, horrifying YouTube videos, but, maybe taking them in one or two at a time is a little easier on the senses than trying to suck it all down at once.
That's a really good point, Larry. I think this movie would be more enjoyable if you were to hunt for these things on YouTube.
Yeah.
Great idea. Listeners, do this. Hopefully we haven't spoiled too many of these things for you.
They are scary, and they do effectively, when the good entries anyway, feel real to me.
During the spookiest time of the year, there are a few guidelines all ghosts and goblins should follow. Always stay on sidewalks. Never go to a stranger's house. And never go out alone.
This is the one night. All sorts of things. Roam free. Sorry. All these traditions.
Wait.
What?
You're supposed to keep it lit.
Why?
Ancient tradition?
putting on costumes.
I look like I'm 5.
You look great.
What did we do now?
We meet our dates.
Jack-o'-lanterns.
Why are we here?
To pay our respects to the dead.
The Halloween school bus massacre.
They started to protect us, but
Morning, guys. How are you doing down there? Hiding buddies?
nowadays, no one really cares.
Just wants to live.
Trick or treat?
Trick or treat.
Trick or treat, man. This is written and directed by Michael Dougherty. He was wrapped up in the first X-Men movie with Bryan Singer, who is a producer on this. And the word on the street is when Bryan Singer decided not to do X-Men 3 and instead to do a very mediocre Superman movie, he jumped ship from the studios, and they punished him by basically burying this movie Trick or Treat. It was released very quietly with very little fanfare or advertising and sort of died a quick and quiet death. It's become sort of a bit of a cult object. The fans have discovered it as time has gone on, and I think it's a completely decent Halloween night movie. What do you think of Trick or Treat?
This is a very, very special movie. And it's completely deserving of all of the praise that it gets. I was a little bit disappointed when I picked it up and saw that they were all written and directed by Mike Dougherty, because I liked the styles of the previous movies where we got different writing styles and different directorial styles. But in this case, it works very well with Trick or Treat.
It gives it a uniformity of vision, I guess.
Plus, it lets the director do certain things that weren't possible in the other movies, as in all the stories are linked and woven together and
we
shot
jump
out
around
of sequence.
in time. Yeah, it's sort of Pulp Fiction style presentation of these stories.
Yes. So it starts off with a murder, and you're not really sure if you like. I wasn't sure if I liked the murder when I saw it. Yeah. It seemed a little bit pointless, but it gets better because we come back to it later on.
Yeah, we built our way back to that point, and then it seems sort of to fit in with the rest of the movie more. At first, it's like, okay, here's a derivative kill to start the movie. Ho-hum, ho-hum.
Yes.
But when you watch it the second time, I think you'll find you've got a big smile on your face.
Indeed. And so the first story, is, according to Wikipedia, is titled The Principal,
which largely concerns Dylan Baker.
Yes, playing the murderous Principal Wilkins, trying to cover up his poisoning of one of his students. And the tension is ratcheted up as we realize that he's beginning to contemplate murdering his own son.
You get that impression, like he's really getting irritated by his adorable squeaky-voiced child.
Yes.
And, he's trying to bury a body in the backyard. His kid's yelling at him from the window. He's dealing with his crotchety old neighbor next door. And you get the feeling like he really takes Halloween seriously. This is like his Christmas, birthday, Thanksgiving all wrapped up into one. His Halloween for this guy. And instead of celebrating it with friends or getting drunk, he commits random murders.
Yes, but this first story also goes very well to establishing the rules of this universe, which is
respect
Halloween and its traditions. We dress up as monsters on Halloween to scare away real spooks, and we appease them by giving them candy.
Yeah.
And this comes into play later on in the movie, as we'll find out.
Scenes that seem like they might be extemporaneous are not in this movie. They just their relevance isn't necessarily obvious immediately.
Mm-hmm. Now, at this point, I actually would like to say, if any listeners out there haven't seen this movie,
watch it first.
Watch it first, because what we're going to be talking about here is going to spoil all of the stories. Yeah. And this movie is all about its twists. So, seriously, skip to the next one. Or start watching. Again,
the magical thing about podcasts, you can listen to them whenever you want. If you haven't seen Trick or Treat, get your hands to it. Watch it. I would not want to spoil this movie for anyone.
So, the one thing I'll take away from the principal, probably the line when his kid shouts out the window, "Charlie Brown's an asshole!" Love it. Next story is the school bus massacre revisited.
Yes. A group of kids are, well, I guess they're slightly too old to trick or treat, but, well, they're too old to go and get candy, but they're old enough to pull off some mean pranks. And they're collecting pumpkins, and they're inviting this weird girl who's dressed up like a witch and who's presumably somewhere on the autism spectrum, who's a little bit off, and they're going to scare her on Halloween. The leader of the group, which I thought was a brilliant choice, is dressed as an angel, and is just wonderfully characterized by this young actress as that really pretty spoiled girl who is just so awful.
Indeed.
And she can charm anyone with a smile and her wet little eyes and convince anyone to do anything for her, but she's just bad.
What makes this particular story a joy is that they got such great kids.
All of the actors did a great job.
Yeah, compare and contrast the kids from Kick the Can.
Yeah.
Just world of difference from the woodenness that Spielberg had versus the vibrancy of the performances in School Bus Massacre.
And between the types of all of those kids, I think everybody will find one kid that they'll identify with out of that group.
Yes.
There's that softer kid who's sort of being dragged kicking and screaming into it. You kind of feel the worst for because you just know he wasn't a bad kid. It was just the circumstances kind of got carried away on him. And then there was the other boy who was just crushing on this leader of the group and basically mindlessly doing anything she says until it starts getting out of hand.
Yes, and it does get out of hand, but then bad things actually happen when the real ghosts come to get them, and that is legitimately scary. Mm-hmm. And once again, very realistic performances are dragged out of these kids. Yeah, fantastic story.
Yeah. The great thing that I like, and it's again, we're talking spoilers, but she sets up the story of the school bus that sank into the reservoir.
Rock quarry,
pardon me. And, you during the context of that story, we believe she's trying to scare this little girl. The story that she's telling is true. It's not just a Halloween story, as we find out. Not just in this segment, but it has ties to things that we see subsequently. And I thought that was very clever to, double down on that bus story.
Yes, the school bus is actually there.
Yeah.
3 young ladies go out to Halloween partying, and with the object of letting Anna Paquin's character have a good first time.
Yes.
And we assume that this means that she's going to have her virginity taken from her this evening. But as we discover, they are all 3 of them werewolves, and it's actually her first human kill that they're introducing her to.
Another great juxtaposition too. They're all dressed as fairy tale characters.
Yes.
So they all again look very beautiful and very pretty and very sweet, and they are not beautiful or pretty or sweet.
And in fact, Anna Paquin is dressed as Red Riding Hood, which makes it very ironic that she's a wolf. And Principal Wilkins shows up.
Yeah, he's on the menu for that night.
Yes. So this was an okay story. What I really liked about it was, of course, the twist at the end, discovering that all 3 of them are werewolves, and then once they transform, that's just fantastic with the flesh zippers.
Yeah.
Where they throw off their human skins.
I love how, they just completely embraced it. They did a great transformation sequence. The werewolves were creepy and sexy and, good stuff.
Yeah.
I think it was probably the least complicated story that he told here as far as, I was not surprised by the twist in that story, whereas the other stories had, I think, the twist kind of got me a little bit.
I was quite surprised because first of all, we had no idea who this vampire character was that was walking around biting people. Mm-hmm. And I was convinced that he was going to do something terrible to Anna Paquin. Yeah. And then when it turns out to be Principal Wilkins and she eats him.
It's not subtle, though, at all. With the whole thing is, her mom says, always referred to her as the runt of the little litter, and meeting at, was it Sheep's Grove, that they were sending the guys to meet them, and the Red Riding Hood thing. And you get to the point where you're looking for the twist, or at least I do sometimes. I can't help it.
I missed all of those references when I saw it.
Yeah, that was the one that I caught. I just knew that I wasn't afraid for Anna Paquin's character, for whatever reason. Even if I didn't know necessarily, how it was going to play out, or that the principal was going to be involved in that story as well. I was pretty sure that, she was going to wolf out at some point.
Well, I'm sorry that you had this delightful story spoiled by your own reaching for what the plot is going to be.
Just take the ride, Parsons. Just take the ride.
So, story number 4 is called Sam.
Yes.
And stars Brian Cox as he does battle with the evil spirit of Halloween. Sam, or Sam Hain.
Brian Cox has come up a few times in the podcast already. I'm a big fan. I think he's got a lot of range, and yet he's always somehow Brian Cox at the same time whenever you see him. There's something really great about his voice in this movie. It sounds almost like he had a chest cold or like a wheeze going, and we find out why he's playing it that way later on. Because I guess we'll just go right to it. We find out he was actually the bus driver that drove the bus into the rock quarry later on. And when in the story she told, we saw the driver hitting the shore, and as he got to the shore, he was making this terrible wheezing sound. Mm-hmm. And that's how it threaded back to the Brian Cox character, because he was just... He seemed like he was he looks like an old fellow, but he seemed like he was playing it like an even older dude in a lot of ways.
Yes, he seems to live a very unhealthy life. And once again, Brian Cox, great performance, really disappears into the role. You'd never guess that he's a Scottish gentleman, the way that he roars at people in this and wheezes.
And I think in a lot of ways this story is maybe... they're all kind of ridiculous, but this is like a pretty out there chapter in the movie. And you really need an actor who's going to commit and sell and not wink. Mm-hmm. And Brian Cox was there for him 100%.
The coolest part of this is when Mr. Krieg, that's his character's name, blows Sam's head open with a shotgun, and there's all that stringy pumpkin goop inside.
Yes.
Love that.
Sam is, I guess, this weird Halloween figure. We haven't really mentioned him.
Yes.
We see him briefly at the beginning. He commits that first murder, but he looks like a little kid in a particularly filthy ghost Halloween costume.
Or a scarecrow or something.
But if you disrespect the rules of Halloween, Sam's going to give you some shit. Like, the girl at the beginning was taking down the decorations before Halloween was over. It's a big no-no. And Brian Cox was scaring kids away from his house and not giving out candy.
Doesn't believe in Halloween, and he learns that lesson very hard.
Homie, don't play that.
Yep.
Homie, don't play that. Sam's going to come pay you a visit.
Mm-hmm.
And basically what we see is this poor old guy being sieged by this supernatural, unkillable, sadistic creature, which doesn't seem intent on killing him, just hurting him repeatedly.
And there's a great scare in that as well when we first see Sam as he climbs up onto the bed.
Yes.
I love that. So, and then it all ties in so nicely at the end where we discover that the very first scene happens right after the last scene of
Sam leaves that house and
Mm-hmm.
walks across the street to see this woman taking down her Halloween decorations.
Mm-hmm.
All of this that we have just talked about, I should add, is in like a lean 82 minutes. It's amazing how much story he packed into 82 minutes. And they all work. Even like I complained, if it wasn't really a complaint, I kind of felt like I knew where the Anna Paquin thing was going. It didn't really hurt the enjoyment of it at all. I at least got the twist of the principal being involved. But this movie's got everything, and the kitchen sink. You got your werewolves, you got that weird little pumpkin kid. You got,
zombies,
serial killers, bullying kids. All of the stories pay off. They have sort of, they have their own little twists and wrinkles to them. I mean, it's a really fantastic anthology film, and it's going to rank high for me.
I can't think of anything bad to say about it.
Coming soon. Jolting tales of horror. Creepshow. From the author of Carrie, The Shining, and Cujo. And the creator of Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead. You'll scream at ghastly ghouls. Cringe at weird kids. And shiver at the doings of evil doctors.
This is going to be extremely painful, Mr.
I like Stephen King, and I like some of George A. Romero's work quite a bit. Specifically, if there's zombies involved, I'm interested in Romero. But this is an interesting anthology, sort of a tribute to the old EC comics from back in the day.
Before the Comics Code Authority ruined them.
Yes. Exactly, took all the teeth out of them. So the stories that you're going to encounter here are very, very simple, and there's, people wearing white hats and people wearing black hats. And in a way, that really feeds to Stephen King's talents, because I do find that he does sort of paint in black and white, especially with his characters. They're either super good or they're super evil.
Yes.
And when you're painting in these cartoonish comic book broad strokes, it works. I've said, I like Stephen King, but having him as your screenplay author is not usually necessarily a good thing, and I think it works well enough in Creepshow here.
As far as I know, these are all original Stephen King stories, aren't they? He didn't actually go back to any of the old EC
I believe
comics.
Most of these are either adapted from some of his short stories or, just written in the style of those EC comics. I've read a lot of his short fiction, and I don't remember running into most of these stories in any other format. When you move on to Creepshow 2, they're direct adaptations of his short fictions. I think this is his sort of version of an EC comic for film.
Now, there's some great ideas in this movie, and one of them I feel is the lighting effects, particularly during the dramatic scenes, are great. The way that they'll do these
color stains.
Yeah, color stains and splashes when somebody sees something horrifying that mimic the old comics. But what I am wondering about, and maybe you can answer this for me, why do you think Romero thought it was important to have all the performances be hammy? Is there something about the EC comics that suggested cheesy dialogue?
Well, like I said, the stories are very simplistic, and it's basically set up to the payoff of the kill or the scare or the boo. I think that he wanted to make this a funny, scary movie. And I think in the end, it's much more scary than funny. And the funny wasn't in the script as much as it was in the presentation.
Well, in any case, I think that a lot of the scary gets detracted from in the performances.
Right.
Lots of scenes could have been way more frightening if we cared about the characters, for instance. And giving legitimate performances is one of those things. So,
let's duck in, shall we?
Yes, our first story is Father's Day.
Yes.
Not too much to say about this. A shambling zombie comes to life and kills a bunch of people. Yes. The end.
Yeah, pretty much. There's a early performance from Ed Harris. We get to see him doing some funky disco dancing. And, the I want my cake, my Father's Day cake, was a line that was repeated a lot around my house when I was a kid.
More on that later.
Yes.
So the next one is The Lonesome Death of Jordy Verrill.
Yes, and this one actually stars Stephen King as a complete yokel, God don't make no trash, piece of white trash,
A meteor falls on his farm, and he immediately tries to think of ways that he can
profit from this.
Yes, but unfortunately, some of the meteor shit falls out and starts growing weird plant life all over his farm.
Now, Stephen King has admitted at this time, subsequently, that he's quite embarrassed by his performance in Creepshow, but that his direction, as told by his dear friend Romero, was that he couldn't play it too big, that this would be fun and funny, and that he was right for the part. And Stephen King had a head full of alcohol and cocaine, and I think that it's the most clearly funny of all of the stories, as far as like it's deliberately goofy and funny. And the visions that we are treated to, sort of the Jody Verrill vision that we get.
I love how whenever he imagines an authority figure or someone that's smarter than him, he imagines his dad.
His dad dressed as these different people, yeah.
And
either a cop or a doctor.
The Department of Meteors at the university is pretty great.
Yeah. And just, his strategies of dealing with this, his green mossy plants are growing everywhere that he has touched or that the meteor has touched, and his solution is to drink a bottle of vodka and watch wrestling and hope that the problem goes away.
Mm-hmm. And then later he tries to wash it off with water. Great plan there.
Yeah. And even the vision of his dad waving a finger saying, this is a stupid idea, will not stop him from pressing forward. A lot of people would just, have a hard time wading through this story, I imagine. But I kind of get a kick out of it. I mean,
I do too.
Stephen King is over the top, and I don't think he's an actor necessarily, but I think he works well enough for the segment that they were doing here. And it still somehow feels of the world of the rest of the movie. Like I say, I think this is the most overtly funny of the stories, but it definitely belongs.
Yeah. My only criticism would of course be Stephen King's performance. I think it did just go a little bit too far over the edge for me, but also the main problem would be that there's no plot to it.
No.
The plot goes, something bad happened, then it got even worse.
Yeah.
End of story. So
it keeps with the theme of grand simplicity. Yes.
Yeah. It's got some nice laughs though, and so I can't fault it completely.
Good times.
Next, we have Something to Tide You Over.
Yes. Sam Malone, Ted Danson, in pre-Cheers, Ted Danson, and a pre-Naked Gun, Leslie Nielsen, where we were still allowed to take him a little bit seriously. This is sort of a standard revenge type of story, revenge from beyond the grave. A wealthy sociopath finds out that his wife has been cheating on him, and since he's very, as to his own admission, very insane when it comes to things that belong to him, he feels it necessary to dispatch both his wife and her lover. But he does it in a very, very cruel, torturous way, by leading them out to the beach, his private beach, burying them neck deep in the sand, hooking up a video so that they could see their lover in a similar situation further down the beach, being drowned as the tide comes in.
And watching the whole thing
compound. In his compound. Like a very, very evil Stephen King villain that we have here. And, in true nature of the Creepshow simplicity, the ghosts or zombies return from their watery grave to get their revenge.
Let's call them revenants. That's a much cooler term.
They're very good.
This one was interesting because of Leslie Nielsen, I thought. This was the first, dramatic role I've ever seen him in, and I just thought it was refreshing.
Yeah. He does play it very seriously, and his character is fucked. He is a crazy, crazy dude. And I liked it. It was sort of refreshing to me that he knew it. He knew it. He knew that this was completely crazy and that there were certain things that he was not right about, but he'd somehow made his peace with it, that this was who he was.
Yes. And the fact that I think he gives the most dialed back performance in the movie is also important as well. establishing him as a villain.
There is an interesting bit of continuity here, and I don't know if we want to just blame Leslie Nielsen or Romero, but in the climactic sequences, when he starts hearing noises in his house, he's in the shower. And at no point is his hair even a little bit wet at any point in the shower. I also really love the scene when he finally does see the creatures and they do the zoom in with the light. And where any other person, I think, would be screaming, he's laughing hysterically.
Yeah.
I love that shot so much. How do you react when you actually turn that corner and see those vengeful ghosts coming to get you? Like, you're screwed. There's absolutely nothing he could have done to save himself, I believe.
Maniacal laughter.
And, he empties his bullets into them. He tries to lock himself in another room. He turns around and somehow they've just appeared before him. And he starts to laugh. And I just loved it. Good stuff.
Our next story is very special to you, as I remember, Larry.
Yes.
Tell us about what your dad used to do to you.
This is another one of the many 80s horror movies that I saw way too young. And of all the horrible stories and, awful violence that is in this Creepshow movie, it was this story, The Crate, that terrified me. And it concerns a janitor finding a mysterious crate under the stairs at this university. And him, unfortunately, inviting his professor friend to help him open it to see what's inside. We, in my garage in Beaumont, Alberta, where I grew up, had a crate that did not look at all dissimilar to this crate in the movie. And my father, knowing I was terrified of this, loved to send me out to the garage to get something. He would probably, even if he didn't need it, he'd go get me a length of those old Christmas lights, they're in the garage, right by the crate, he would say. Son of a bitch. Tom Savini, it should be mentioned, is responsible for the makeup and special effects in Creepshow. And for the most part, it's very over the top in the style of EC Comics. So the violence is, it's nasty and somewhat realistically rendered, but the context is so ridiculous as to sort of detract from the horror a little bit. Not so in this Crate installment. There's a scene where a student gets mauled by this creature in the crate, which is just embedded in my subconscious because I saw it too young. The effects stand up today. A lot of stuff about this movie doesn't. A lot of the fashions, the synthy scores, like the color scheme, very 80s. But the special effects that Tom Savini did with those creature kills in this movie still look horrible and awesome at the same time.
The monster in the crate still looks scary too.
Yeah.
With those yellow eyes peering out. And there are some great scenes of suspense where someone is inching towards the crate and you know that it's in there.
Yeah.
But they want to go there for some reason. You're like, turn back, this is not a good idea. Or what the heck are you doing? Yeah. Just so...
Hal Holbrook plays this really put-upon fellow whose wife, played by Adrienne Barbeau, just is this raging alcoholic bitch. He lives this miserable marriage, and I'm sure he has a part to play in why he's so unhappy, but he believes that his wife, Billy, would be better served underground and that his life would be better. And when his best friend comes hysterical to his door explaining that there's a monster that he opened a crate, freed from a crate, that has killed the janitor, he does not immediately panic. Instead, he sees this as an opportunity to deal with his wife.
Indeed.
In a way, that makes the crate the most complex story of the entire movie, in that they added the additional wrinkle of him, murdering his wife via this crate monster. It's also the only story that's not wrapped up neatly. In the end, I think, they show this. He thinks that he's gotten rid of the crate by throwing it down into
Another rock quarry.
Another rock quarry. Here we go. But we see that it has escaped, and at the end of that story, the crate monster was out there and free. And young single-digit age category Larry was not okay with that, and still isn't.
Brilliant.
I love that segment. I mean, I do enjoy Creepshow overall, and we'll watch it front to back, but it's one of those things where I'm having a conversation with somebody, and, oh, you haven't seen that? I will put in the disc and show them the crate monster, because it's nuts. It's nuts. It's also noticeably the longest story, too, I think, of the collection.
I myself was introduced to Creepshow via The Crate by you fairly early in our relationship as friends.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you. So we have a last story here called They're Creeping Up on You. Basically, there's a creepy millionaire sealed in a room who's afraid of germs and bugs, and then
he's also racist.
Yes, because we needed that, and
we have to not like this guy.
Yeah, and then he sees more and more bugs, and then there's a bug explosion. The end. That's basically the plot.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most interesting things, maybe the most interesting thing about this segment is how disgusting it apparently was to be on set for this. They used real cockroaches. There's no CG anywhere in this movie, and apparently it stank. Like, it was just like a repellent environment to be for days and days and days and days. And apparently they'd rented all these different camera equipment and cranes or whatnot to make the production. And maybe somebody was doing a cockroach count. Maybe they weren't. But in the documentary I saw on Romero, there was people in the production saying that they were pretty sure some equipment was getting returned infested with these cockroaches.
Well, I was reading on Wikipedia, actually, someone was doing a count because the cockroaches came from a foreign country.
Yeah, they had to fly them in. Yeah.
Yes, and so they had to keep track of them for some reason. So between every scene, they had to count the number of cockroaches so that they could be returned.
Yeah. It's probably one of the grossest things in the movie when all the bugs emerge from the body of this old curmudgeon. But at that point, having already seen The Crate, if I was numb by this point.
Yeah.
It might have actually been a story too many.
I think it would have been better if The Crate was at the end, honestly, because it's the high
strong,
point. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, the one thing about this is that it really goes to highlight the shitty 80s synthesizer, because for the first time we hear real music in the form of the old-timey tunes that the old man is playing, and they really serve to just put what we've been hearing to shame at this point. And you're, oh, wow, I've been listening to shit this whole time.
Yeah.
So... yeah.
It doesn't necessarily fit, like, I can deal with an 80s synthy soundtrack because what choice do you have? But it's one of those things that doesn't necessarily seem to fit with the old-timey EC comic book thing either. In a way, I think you wanted, like, an orchestral score. Maybe they just couldn't afford it.
Well, that's probably the case. In any case, you really get the idea that it's been dated by the music, which is a shame. Because many 80s movies have been ruined as like that for me.
I wouldn't say that it's ruined. I think that, like, if you can put up with some 80s-ness to your movies, you're not going to waste your time watching Creepshow.
Fair enough.
I like it. And the stories, for the most part, are fairly quick and uncomplicated, you know. It's worth a look. It's definitely worth a look.
For me, there were enough stories in here that didn't have a real 3-act plot to them that it was they disappointed me. Plus the hammy acting, I was not behind 100% because I couldn't.
It felt deliberate though. I didn't feel like they were weak performances. I felt like they were doing what was asked of them.
For sure, it was deliberate, but I don't know why.
Yeah.
I do not know why they thought it was necessary to do that. But still, some great ideas and some great stories.
And if for nothing else, man, check out the Crate. Pardon me. Also interesting to note, the movie is bookended with a little kid reading a comic book. Well, I guess having his comic books destroyed by his mean old dad. And that boy is played by Joe Hill, or Joe King at the time, Stephen King's son, who's grown up to be a horror author in his own right. So it's kind of an interesting little time capsule piece.
Stephen King, your favorite novelist and master of modern horror, has written his first motion picture screenplay. It combines all the elements of his creative imagination. Lovable pets, classic cars, quiet evenings, favorite films.
Who killed the son of it? Good idea.
Adorable kids.
Help me! It's after me!
And of course, a monster or two. Experience a series of electrifying adventures as seen through Stephen King's Cat's Eye.
Okay, we're going to stay in Stephen King country for this last review, which is Cat's Eye. And I know what you were probably thinking when you watched this movie. Where can I get the soundtrack? Right? I'm not wrong. You were very excited by the music in this film, I'm guessing?
Actually, you know, the 80s and this was not that distracting in this movie. No.
This one felt, even more so than Creepshow to me, this one really felt period to me. This really felt 80s for some reason.
Well, maybe that's why it worked for me, because it was clearly set in the 80s, so it would make sense that it had an 80s soundtrack.
And this was Stephen King's heyday. And the opening sequence in which we see our cat getting in and out of trouble, this cat that's going to sort of tenuously tie these three stories together, is nearly run over by Christine from the novel Christine, and is being chased clearly by Cujo from the novel Cujo. And there's all these little seated, Stephen King, we like Stephen King, which seems a little bit obnoxious, and why are you taking us out of the movie in this way? But it's also very fitting, because Stephen King does that shit all of the time in his books. He'll reuse characters from different stories, or, he will reference events from other books. And so, and because it was the sort of title sequence, I kind of let that go. But once the movie sort of settles in, we start seeing these three adaptations of Stephen King stories. The first of which, called Quitters, Inc.,
correct,
starring James Woods and Alan King. Jeremy, what did you think of Cat's Eye? And starting with Quitters, Inc.
Okay, well, Quitters, Inc. is about James Woods. I can't remember his character's name, but in any case, he is a smoker who is referred to an anti-smoking clinic, which is staffed by psychos who stalk him and tell him that if he takes another smoke, they're going to electrocute his wife for a little bit.
Yeah.
And from there, they're going to go to increasingly cruel punishments if inflicted on him. Yes, inflicted on him and his family if he continues to smoke.
Yeah, I don't know if it's made clear in the movie, but in the actual story, it's clearly run by the mafia. It's an organization. Some high-level mafioso guy was dying of cancer and was taking it personally. So his sort of legacy is this Quitters, Inc., and it's run by hard cases from the mafia.
Well, that makes sense. It indeed was not made clear in the movie who these guys were. They had Italian accents and they looked like mobsters, but as far as I knew, they were just weirdos.
Yeah.
Well, this was a pretty good story. Had a satisfying ending, particularly with the twist, I thought.
A little reveal there.
Yeah.
It's interesting for a few reasons. I mean, James Woods is in the central performance, but it's using his manic energy to a sort of a different length than you're used to seeing. You're sort of used to seeing him playing an alpha male in control, sort of calling the shots. And he's rocked back on his heels and fairly desperate for most of this story, which is not typical ground for James Woods. I liked seeing that. I also liked seeing how different the world is. I grew up, this is me, mid-80s. I was, in the height of my childhood. People smoked everywhere, and everybody smoked.
Yes.
You see this in old news. I remember we were talking about The Exorcist with Terry the other day, and how the doctor, when they were talking to Regan, was smoking in the office with her. You just wouldn't see that in a movie nowadays. It's interesting that to see the change in the zeitgeist, I guess.
Well, even the bars that we grew up with as started attending, we were dens of smoking, and it's just everything has changed now.
Yeah, it's almost like the story almost wouldn't work today. It had to be set in the 80s for this to work.
It's an interesting point.
Because as far as the visual temptation being everywhere he looks, there's people lighting up, and it's sort of driving him crazy, and I kind of dug that.
Well, I have an uncle who quit smoking entirely, and to this day, it's been decades since he's had a smoke, but to this day, when he sees somebody lighting up, he's just got that little addict voice that says, boy, that would be nice to have a smoke.
Yeah. So moving on to the second story, and I'm thinking this might be why they decided to downplay the mob angle in the first story, is because we kind of have another story about a criminal mastermind trying to get some vengeance.
It's called The Ledge, and it's essentially the same story as Something to Tide You Over, isn't it? Rich psycho finds out his wife is fooling around and
decides to kill both parties.
Kill and torment both people.
Yeah. And I think that this character has a little less color, or at least the performance did, than Leslie Nielsen's character in Creepshow. But I liked the idea of the ledge, and that he was, in his mind, this was a rigged game. You got the idea that he'd done this a few times. He had a few booby traps set, and his fire hose torments, and the whole thing. It's not just the stress of Robert Hayes trying to walk around the ledge of this building. It's the torment that he goes through at the hands of this gangster and of one particularly irritating pigeon.
Yes, the pigeon. Pecking at his toes as he tries to walk along the edge.
Yeah. Another interesting connection with Creepshow here is the juxtaposition. Robert Hayes is probably most famously known as the lead character in the Airplane franchise. So
Leslie Nielsen?
Seeing him play a straight role quite well in this movie was sort of echoes of Leslie Nielsen's work in Creepshow.
Was this movie... It was after...
this would be after Airplane, but before Naked Gun, or at least before the Naked Gun movies.
It was after...
the TV show, I think.
The gangster guy played Baron Harkonnen, right?
I believe so, yeah.
Yes. Well, overall, a pretty satisfying story. Once again, not too much bad to say about it.
Yeah. Interesting, both of the first stories, again, having to do with the mobs and murder and revenge, or but not supernatural element, two of them.
Until story number 3.
Until story number 3. You almost think like they were doing sort of Stephen King straight stories until we get to this third story. And the other interesting thing about the third story is that as far as I know, it's not adapted necessarily from one of his stories. I believe this was just written for the screen.
That is correct.
Yeah. And Drew Barrymore, who was a big star at the time because of E.T., and who had, before this, done Firestarter, which was an adaptation of another Stephen King book. They try to get her into the other stories here and there. The cat's sort of questing to find her.
Yes.
But in a way, the film's star, the box office draw to Cat's Eye, was Drew Barrymore.
And she does a good performance in the third story, which is General. No, just General.
Just General, yes. The cat finds her. She wants to keep the cat. She names it General. And then we find out why the cat has been drawn to her.
A hideous, tiny troll is hiding in her wall and menacing her, stealing her breath during the night. And the cat is her nocturnal guardian.
Absolutely. It seems like the cat was almost built to do battle with a creature like this.
Yes. This is a pretty neat creature, too. It's wearing a medieval jester outfit.
Yeah.
And it's got a tiny little curved blade as well.
Yeah, he looks almost like he could have been like a particularly nasty creature that escaped from the world of Labyrinth. There's something puppety about him. There's something like sort of giddy and mischievous,
But at the same time...
sinister.
Yes. I like the fact that since this was filmed in the 80s, and this creature was supposed to be a tiny creature. They obviously had to make a set that was 10 times as big as the real life and have this regular-sized guy wandering around in it. And that was pretty fun.
It appeals to the strength of Stephen King's stories. Like, some of them are sort of grounded in reality, and some of them are just absolutely crazy. Shit happens just because it happens. We have to accept this little troll on the wall because this is the world that we're in. But I also thought it was kind of clever that he stole the breath from the little girl as she slept, because this thing, this sort of idea of breath stealing, is actually associated with cats. There's a superstition about cats that if given the chance, they would smother older people or children in their sleep. So then you're going to you start building your own mythology out of this. Well, it's actually these little trolls that do that. The cats were trying to protect them, but people assumed it was the cat that did this, right? As bizarre and weird as it is, it's kind of smart too. I liked it, but it did seem like the odd story out. And there's only 3 stories to choose from in this one. This one obviously was the one they spent the money on, as far as the special effects and the rendering of the creature and the scale of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Once again, a good story. I guess I have problems with the very end where the troll somehow lands on the record player and the cat knows to turn up the speed and sends it flying across the room. That's a little bit dumb.
Yeah.
But other than that, a pretty good story and a neat idea for a monster as well. And yeah, it did seem a little bit strange that that there wasn't anything supernatural before this, but on the other hand, you gotta end your show with a bang.
Yeah. The through line, I guess, the connection to these 3 stories was just really Stephen King, and like the very thinly thing with the cat being involved in 3 stories.
This was a great cat, by the way. I don't know if they used multiple cats.
They must have. They almost always do, I think.
But this cat, or collection of cats, whatever it was, had a real charisma to it, I have to say.
A certain star quality.
I'm a cat man. So overall, my opinion of Cat's Eye was that it's just a very solid anthology movie here. You can't really point to one of these stories and say that was weak.
Can I ask you something?
What?
Did it scare you?
The troll kind of got to me a little bit.
That would be one, if it's a complaint. I mean, I do like the movie. I think it's good. It's in the horror section, and I don't know. I wasn't particularly scared by it. Maybe if I, saw it when I was younger, I would have been. But I thought they were interesting stories with nice little twists, and I think that they suited the length well. I think any of those stories stretched to feature length probably wouldn't hold together. But in this little package, they worked fine. But I say if you're a Stephen King fan, absolutely. If you want, a good, decent anthology watch, that's good. If you want to be scared, I would maybe escort you over to like the VHS or one of the other ones, Trick or Treat or something like that.
Well, perhaps a viewer who is not as jaded as us
perhaps
would find some of these stories a little bit more frightening.
Fair enough.
We need to see people's junk getting ripped off in order to be scared. That's how sad and pathetic we are. Number 6 on the list is Creepshow. Yes, it had the crate in it, but unfortunately it had some crappy stories and some shitty acting in it, intentional though it was. Number 5 is Twilight Zone the movie. My main problem with that, of course, was Kick the Can and the Go Nowhere Vic Morrow story. But there was also the fact that all of the stories had been spoiled for me. Number 4 is VHS. Very strong beginning, but once again weighted down by some real clunkers. Number 3 is Cat's Eye, which just seemed to be strong to me. Yes, maybe not that scary, but there wasn't anything especially bad I could say about any of those stories.
Right.
2 is The Signal. I admired the intelligence of the movie and how it got me thinking afterwards quite a bit. And then Trick or Treat is at number 1.
Yeah.
Flawless victory.
Flawless victory. I actually put Cat's Eye at number 6, and I like it fine. Somebody had to fit that bottom slot, and that was it. I was the least scary and the least thrilling. It was sort of the most middle of the day kind of TV movie almost. It was completely adequate. It was good. The slightest meal of the group, I found. Number 5, I put The Twilight Zone. It's because you got 2 weak stories and then 2 really, really strong stories. And I think the strong stories make it worth waiting through the week. And if you don't want to watch the first 2 stories, that's fine. You're not going to lose any plot.
That's a very good point, folks. If you don't like any of these stories, just fast forward.
Number 4 is where I put The Signal. And I really do like The Signal, and I think that they accomplished a lot with a very modest budget. I think it was the most loosely an anthology film of them all. And as much as I like the middle funny segment, just wasn't sure how to process it. So it ranked a little lower as a result of that. Creepshow made it all the way to number 3 for me. Again, I have a personal investment of the crate monster really, really messing with me from a young age. So that one really speaks to me. And I'm also a big Stephen King fan. So number 2, actually, I went with VHS. Mainly because the concept was very solid, and I think that it's probably scared me the most of all of these movies. Like that, those 2 stories in particular, the Skype conversation and the guys with the spy glasses were the 2 real high watermarks. But I just think overall through concept and execution, very surprising. Yeah, it's worth your time. And number 1, absolutely, was Trick or Treat. Absolutely. And it was very easy to me, clear to me that Trick or Treat was going to be number 1. Sorting out the rest of the list, actually, I found kind of tricky. Like I say, the found footage genre for me tends to work between 80 and 90 minutes. The longer you sort of pull that, the harder it is to maintain the reality.
Right.
So, I don't know. But just like I said, the level of the scares that I got out of the stories that worked were scarier than probably any other stories that I encountered.
Fair enough. So let's move on to our favorite story.
Number 6, I put the Something to Tide You Over from Creepshow. I don't know if it would have the same effect again if I hadn't seen it when I was just a little kid, but I really like the effects, like the bullet hits on those water creatures and all of the seaweed, and the way they were so saturated that all that did was basically make them splash and leak more fluid. I don't know. Revenants, yeah. I really like that. Okay. So then number 5, from the Twilight Zone, the Gifted Child. What was the name of that segment?
It's a Good Life.
It's a Good Life. 2 things of that stand out for me is the removal of the mouth of the one character, and that scene where he brings the cartoons out of the television to entertain everyone. And it's really entertaining for the little kid and really horrifying for everybody else. Yeah, so yes. Then I put the Wrong House. Oh no, pardon me. The webcam story from VHS.
The sick thing that happened to Emily when she was younger.
Yeah. Sorry, so that would be the number 4. Number 4. Yeah. Again, I really like the performance by that actress in that because she would seem to be like this naive victim of this guy, but she had some hard bark on her, and I think under weaker hands that story might not have worked as well. And yeah, the twist of finding out that her rock was actually the guy causing it was brutal. Then number 3 would be Terror at 20,000 Feet. John Lithgow. I mean, I think enough said.
Yep.
That gremlin is still a great special effects, and that performance is solid. If you watch nothing else in the Twilight Zone set, you should watch that one. Number 2 is I Like You. The succubus, whatever creature that gargoyle-like woman was in the first segment of VHS. And of course, number 1.
The crate.
The crate monster. I'm like, maybe that VHS segment should genuinely be the number 1, but the crate monster has caused me to lose the most sleep out of probably any horror movie. So it had to be number 1 for me.
Those are very good selections, and I can't fault you with any of them.
Mm-hmm.
My number 6 is Sam from Trick or Treat.
Mm-hmm.
Brian Cox versus a horrible pumpkin-headed kid. Where can you go wrong? Number 5, same as you, is It's a Good Life with the evil Anthony.
Right.
Great concept, funny performances, and that cartoon monster is great. Number 4 is actually Transmission number 2 from The Signal.
The funnier one.
Yeah, I really dug the transition from funny to disgust that happened and the way that it twisted my insides like that. 3 is The School Bus Massacre Revisited from Trick or Treat.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Really like those kids' performances, and there's some really scary zombies. Those kids that went in the school bus were scary before they became zombies.
Yeah, those did like some of those horrifying costumes they all were wearing.
And their silence as well.
Yeah,
that.
they're very stoic.
Mm-hmm. Number 2 is The Crate from Creepshow for me, for obvious reasons. And then number 1 is Amateur Night from VHS. I Like You.
Wow.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've actually ranked and reviewed twice during this episode.
Yes, you have.
So, does that mean I'm actually beating Jared Berry now?
Yes. I think that this gives you a slight edge on Jared.
Oh, excellent. Hey, Jared Berry, fuck you.
I can think of no better way to end the podcast. Thank you so much, Jeremy. Is there anything else you want to say about anthology films before we put a bow on this?
No, it was a pretty sweet experience. Thanks, Larry.
Is there anything where you'd like to direct our listeners to you on the internet, or anything you'd like to promote?
Well, shameless plug time.
Bring it.
Buy my band's album.
Do it.
The Residuals is the name of the band, Knocking the Window Pane. Probably only available in Saskatoon at the moment, but I like it. And
is there a website or anything for it?
Just on Facebook, you'll see Residuals there. If you want to visit any of our performances, we always post there. And secondly, if you want to visit my blog, pharophobia.blogspot.com. And that's Pharaoh. That's the correct way to spell Pharaoh.
All right, Pharophobia and the Residuals, J Adrian Cook, big friend of the show, the namesake for our Jerrys. Thank you so much, brother.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure.
And so it was that episode Sweet 16 of Rank and Review came to an end. I hope you enjoyed that, and thank you very much for listening. If you'd like to give me some feedback, let me know what I or Jeremy got right or wrong. You can do that at ranknreview@gmail.com. That's ranknreview@gmail.com. My name's Larry Parsons. I'm your host and random Canadian. And thank you so much for listening.